Hi everyone, welcome to History on Trial. We're going to be looking at the origins of Africa, as in the name Africa. And this is a part of a series on psychology of identity. It's been a while. We have not been together for these conversations for a bit here. And we're not going to have the amount of time that we had in the community classroom to cover as much material. And so we're going to have to be very picky and very choosy in terms of what we address, what we look at, and what we spend our time on in this space. This is Dr. Tracey McCarthy, psychologist, attorney, and educator, and we're going to get started. Some of the things we're going to be looking at are dynamics related to when you think about a trial. So we're going to be looking at a sort of formal, semi-formal examination of evidence or facts that might lead to the truth about history and the identity of a number of individuals. And when you have a better understanding of the identity of one group of people, you have a better understanding of the identity of multiple groups of people. And so that's what we're going to be looking at. We're just going to be parsing some facts. This is not a history specialty space because I am not a historian. I am a psychologist, attorney, and educator. And so I am coming at this with a different set of eyes in terms of, how I'm looking at some of this information that a historian or a sociologist or an anthropologist or a religious studies person might look at somewhat differently. And so again, coming at it from a very different angle and looking at the psychological aspects of what is going on historically in terms of identity. And so when we're looking at identity, we're talking about understanding how things are same and how things are different. And so we're going to be looking at some distinguishing characteristics of people or cultures and how some of the people that we're going to be talking about are same, and again, how some of them are different, and the implications of those similarities and those differences, that uniqueness. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that happens often is, people don't want to talk about boundaries. People want to focus on all of the similarities. But in psychology, in terms of IQ, one of the markers of IQ could be said to be this dynamic of understanding how things are similar and how things are different. And so that is one of the measures of IQ, is that ability to see those distinguishing features and those same features. And as always, if this video or any portion of it appears on anything other than Dr. Tracey McCarthy, it is stolen and unauthorized. So let's get started. Okay, you've waited long enough, so let's just jump into this. We are going to be looking at some evidence about the name Africa. We're going to be looking at the origins of this name. Now, previously, if you recall, we looked at the many names of Africa, and so the many names throughout history that land space has been called. And so names such as Olympia and Amoni or Amonis or Ortesia, and also the big one, which would be Afer or Afer, which is related to Abraham's son in this writing. And so in communications between these writers and the British monarchy, you have this discussion about the history of Africa in terms of what it has been called. But what we are looking at is the history of the name Africa. There seems to be so much mystery around it. Where did this name come from? What is Africa all about? Was it called something else in other times? So we know it was called by a variety of things, but there seems to be this settling on this name Africa. And so we're going to look at where Africa came from. And then hopefully what you will be doing with this information as we go forward with this history on trial is taking some of the questions that are thrown out there and doing your own research. It's not possible to cover everything here, and so I will throw things out there in terms of questions for people to go and explore on their own, because there are lots of questions about why this space has been referred to as Africa. And there was even a smaller space on that continent that was known as Africa at one point, but right now the whole thing is known as Africa. And there is lots of speculation about where this name came from. And we are going to look at some really ancient origins of this name, but coming from an unexpected place. So what we found is that apparently Africa has Gaelic roots, and so it is related to Gaul. And so you see, again, these derivatives that were mentioned very early on in terms of the name, in terms of time. And so well before the 1800s, well before the 1500s, you see this naming. And of course, we're talking about something that is Gaelic, and so we are talking about something that is very ancient in terms of time. We're talking about BC here. And so one of the things that was found in the Ireland Library was that Oighrig is considered an Irish name. And so you can see Afrique, Africa, Africa. These are related to individuals in Ireland, Scotland, and so you can also see it's related to the Isle of Man. And this is considered a feminine name. And you can see the history. There are so many women with these Gaelic sorts of roots that have the name Africa. And so this is not some mysterious name that people don't know where it came from. There are some people who know, where this came from, and that this name has been used for a very long period of time. And it is a name that it has been attributed to a number of members of royalty and nobility in Scotland and Ireland, and just that Gaelic heritage in general. And so we're going to go over some of these individuals who were in possession of this name. And you can see Africa, daughter of Godred, king of Man, and also the wife of John de Courcy. And so you will see that there are a number of individual women named Africa in Europe. And you can also see here, it's in this book on Irish names and surnames, and it has an explanation for the names with all sorts of historical notes. And so you can look into this if you are so inclined. And inside of this book, if you look over to the left, you can see this index of names, and these are names of women, and you can see the Irish name there, and you see Afrique and Africa, and then you see the Irish translation. And sorry that's so small. This is blown up as large as possible so that you could also get the context. Now, this is another great source. This is the early sources of Scottish history, and this is from 500 AD to 1286 AD. And so this is a great volume. It comes in more than one volume, as you can see, but you can also look this up, and you can see it for yourself. So it's a great resource in terms of Scottish history. And now let's delve into some of the royal roots and some of this royal lineage related to the name Africa. And so you can see that this is related to William the Lion, and Africa is one of his daughters, or was one of his daughters. And Africa has been spelled a couple of different ways, and you can see here it's spelled Aufrike, or in the alternative, Affrica. And you can also see who Africa married. And here you see a notation of Africa, Aufrica, as being the daughter of Fergus. And so here you can see also in an index the name Africa with both of those spellings. Another source that chronicles the name Africa, and not just the name, but you're talking about a member of royalty. And so you have several Africas who are members of royalty and members of the nobility of Scotland, Ireland. And this is another excellent source. This is about the Isle of Skye, and we will get into some other reasons why this is an excellent source. And so from the Isle of Skye, we have notations about Africa again, and we have additional spellings for Africa. And so we have Africa, or again, the Affrica, daughter of Fergus, Lord of Galloway, who was married to Olaf, king of the islands, and was mother of Godfrey, king of Man and the Hebrides. And so Africa was apparently someone very, very important in terms of Scottish royalty and Scottish nobility. And when you look down further, you can see again the notation that Africa was one of the daughters of William the Lion. And here you see another notation related to their daughter Africa and being married to John de Courcy. You also see another Africa, daughter of Edgar. Then you go on and you see another Afrique, which is another spelling of Africa, daughter of Colleen, Lord of Carrick. Then you see another Africa down below. And that Africa is spelled with the Effric, and then you have the Africa or Afrique spelled with the ICK at the end. And so you see there are a variety of spellings, same word. And here you have an additional spelling of the name Afrique, and it is EAFRIC or EFFRIC. This name was pretty important because they're giving you all of these different spellings of the name, and then also giving you different spellings for even one person. And so then you also have another derivation, which is Ephrata, which is EFFRETA, and you can see the surnames that go along with the Africas. And then you have Africa McPatrick, is again, you have these names recorded, so you can see this starts off very early, and then you're going into the 1500s. Now, in my research, I also dug into the surnames of Scotland, and so we're going to look at that also. So you have the female name Africa, and then you also have the surname of Africa. And I'm going to show you an example of this on the passenger and immigration list. And so we're going to look at that towards the end. Now this gets very interesting in terms of this discussion of the roots of Africa, because this changes a little bit. And so if you look over to the right, on the right hand side at the top there, you'll see information related to this river goddess known as Oighrig. And so this is also related to Afrique and Africa. And you can see the spelling again, the EFFRICK. But again, this is related to the Gaelic and related to this idea of this river goddess. And here, hopefully you can see it a little bit more clearly. It says the name appears to have been originally that of a river goddess. And you can see the different spelling. So you see A-F-R-A-I-G, and then what looks like A-I-T-H-B-R-E-C-C. Again, this is Gaelic. I don't speak Gaelic, and so therefore I probably can't do this much more justice. But you also see spelling that survived into the 18th century, and you see this changing. So you see this Afrique, which is E-F-F-R-I-C-K, which equals, and you look at that spelling there again, survives as this, translates as O-I-G-H-R-I-G. We have to be very careful with anything Gaelic because some of the letters that we may think sound a certain way are not necessarily pronounced the same way in terms of that language. And here you see a notation with the conventional spelling of Africa. And then you hear that there's this dynamic whereby this was a favorite female name in the 12th century going on for the next 400 or 500 years. We know what that time frame was about. And so it's interesting that it went on for that time period and then pretty much ended. But then you end up with an entire continent that we know for sure is known as now as Africa. And so you also see the notation that it appeared at a much earlier date in Ireland with this ICK, and then you have in the 700s, and then you see those additional spellings. And then you see this Africa is daughter of Duncan, Earl of Fife. And then you also see related to Earl of Orkney. And so there's a lot going on with either royal women named Africa in Europe or nobility and the name Africa in Europe. And then here is a communication from the Academy of St. Gabriel. And this is a report, this is from 2006. And so this is a communication where they are discussing the name Africa. And they are identifying that they have found a number of Scots forms of the Gaelic name Oighrig, including Afrique and Ifrique and Afrique and Africa and Afrita and Afrique. And so there are a number of ways to spell this Gaelic name, and they are, identifying these roots. But again, the way that a letter may be pronounced in Gaelic is completely different sometimes than the way it would be pronounced in English. And you can see how these names have appeared in Scottish history. You have Afrique again, MacPhatrick, and that's in the 1500s. And then you have Africa MacPatrick again in the 1500s. And so it's not exactly clear how the name always survives, but you can see a variety of spellings here. And then you also see Afrique McAllister in the 1500s. And there is another word that is related to Afrique and Africa that people might want to make note of. Perhaps there's some more research you can do on that. And it's spelled Nighean. And so that might be worth looking into. You again see Afrique or Afrique related to 1470s. And also, as mentioned earlier, you can see these derivatives in a variety of spaces. And so now you see this derivative for Africa as a part of Icelandic language. And so you see the English to Icelandic dictionary, and then you see Africa and these different ways of spelling Africa. And here we have a few depictions of William the Lion, and this would have been Africa's father. And so you can see a depiction on the left side and then you can see one on the right side, and then you can see another a coin up at the top on the right hand side. And one thing to note about the name William is that it's related to this idea of the resolute protector. And what's really noteworthy is how they have retained Africa in Scotland in the Highlands. And so you have Glen Affric, and you have this beautiful nature preserve, is what this looks like, that is just incredible. And it tells you that Glen Affric is a magical mix of native woods, glistening lochs, and haunting moorland. Features over 30 miles of ancient pine woods and is one of the largest ancient Caledonian pine woods in Scotland. And so again, this is very interesting, given that there has previously been no discussion of which I am aware where people have been talking about this relationship between Scottish nobility, Scottish royalty, and the name for the entire continent known as Africa, coming out of this ancient Gaelic tradition. And additionally, Affric is the name of a river. And again, you see the AFRAIG along with the AFFRIC. And since the research uncovered all of these connections between Scotland and Africa, there was a search done for the immigration and passenger list to see the extent to which there might have been individuals named Africa in terms of surname coming out of Europe and being in America. And there are large numbers of individuals with the surname Africa. And so it's quite amazing, actually. And so you have an individual, Christopher Africa, in Germantown, Pennsylvania in 1774. Again, there are large numbers of individuals in America during very early times with the surname Africa. And hopefully this has given you some food for thought as we put history on trial. We looked at the origins of the name Africa, and this might explain to some extent what looks like to me as an outsider, non-historian, as an unusual relationship between Africa and Scotland. As a matter of fact, when it comes to the history of Benin, Scotland has been very much involved in monitoring the historical development of Benin, that entire area. And so scholars in Scotland have kept up with that very well, and that again was noteworthy in terms of this exploration of this name. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.